I think that's one of the best things about the sport. You can never learn everything, and there's so many different styles and techniques and things you can apply to improve yourself that you're never going to run out of stuff.
A lot of boxing is predicated on muscular endurance over the rounds. So it's about how do you get the best mesh for that individual athlete.
I came out of the ring and we went downstairs. By the time I got to the changing rooms, and I said to Noel, I'm only going to say it once, but I'm glad I was on the watt bike because I can't feel my legs right now. And if I hadn't done that work, I know they wouldn't have been able to stand up.
And the physiological testing will take you so far, but boxing is still, the technical side of it is still the ultimate aim.
When you're the only girl in the gym, is it a topic you actually want to talk about in front of all the boys? Is it something like, is it still thought of as kind of like, I don't want to say anything about it? And I've seen girls be complained at for their weight when actually they just don't want to say they're on their periods. They put on 2 pounds of water. When
you start seeing 12 and 13-year-old kids being forced into weight categories, you think to yourself, somebody's a slap somewhere, and it's not the kid.
If you're eating the amount that less than a 5-year-old kid would eat every single day, and that's it, then for one meal, then you're not putting enough food in your system and you can't perform at the best.
Coaches need to be better educated in these things. Boxing coaches need to be better educated in these things. Auxiliary staff need to be better educated in these things. We can't let this crap continue forever.
Welcome to this new episode. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our sponsor for the podcast, Moxy Monitor. For those who don't know about the Moxy Monitor yet, it's a NIRS device that measures muscle oxygen saturation and blood volume in real time. It's a non-invasive sensor that is placed on the skin and can be worn during any training or sporting activity. Motocross riders and climbers wear it on their forearms, hockey players on the ice, swimmers can wear it in the water. I've used it to test rugby players, CrossFit athletes, endurance athletes, and more. The Moxy allows you to individualize work and rest periods, optimize load, reps, and sets, identify training thresholds in real time, and even correct movements based on what the data is showing you. You can also use the Moxy Monitor to determine an athlete's energetic limiting factor and their individual training zones. Using this process, you can better target the athlete's limiter with precision in order to improve their programming, training, and in turn, their performance. You can view and collect the data on your Garmin watch, and you can also pair the Moxy with other physiological testing products, such as the VO2 Master, Pnoe, and Cosmet VO2 systems. The Moxy is a tool I've used weekly for over a year now with great success, and I highly recommend it to any coach who's interested in digging a little bit deeper on the physiological side of health, fitness, or performance. You can use the coupon code UPSIDE at checkout for a 5% discount on moxymonitor.com/shop. That's UPSIDE for a 5% discount. With that said, let's get into the show. All right, we're live on the podcast, guys. Hannah and Andrew, how are you guys doing?
Doing good.
Very well, thanks. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, it's great to have you on both. Andrew, you're kind of a common figure around here. We've had you on a few times, but I'll let Hannah go first and introduce herself. Hannah, thanks so much for coming on the show. For those who don't know who you are and what you do, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? And then Andrew, you'll give us the Coles notes, and people who want to know more about you can go check out I think 2 or 3 episodes we've done now together.
Yeah, I think it's 2.
Yeah, I think that's what it was. Hannah, the floor is yours.
Cool. Thanks very much. So my name is Hannah Rankin. I am Scotland's first ever female world champion, and recently I just picked up the WBA and IBO world titles down here in London at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium on a massive night of boxing for me. So yeah, dreams realised, and very, very happy about that. I also have a secondary career. I'm a classical bassoonist. I play with orchestras, and I've just come from a rehearsal actually. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. Andrew?
So actual ramble. So I'm a sports scientist, exercise physiologist at Evolve Performance. We work with a range of athletes, like with Hannah, etc. And for my sins, an old bloke doing a PhD with John Babbage at Aberdeen University with my secondary supervisors, Ashley Williams and kind of Graham Sorby, where we're looking at all things physiological to do with boxing, demands and needs, and a whole heap of really super interesting geeky science.
Yeah, as we've done in the past on the podcast. So we'll definitely go into some of this today. Hannah, can you tell us a little bit about how you got started in boxing? Were you always in the world of combat sports and boxing, or how did you come to it?
No, actually, my first sort of experience with combat sports was actually Taekwondo as a kid. My mum made the clever move to avoid us fighting each other at home and send us off to a club to do it, you know, because then somebody else was supervising that. So me and my sisters, we all did taekwondo when we were little, but then I actually followed a career into music. I did my undergraduate at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland in Glasgow. And then at the end of that, I wanted to get sort of active and fit again, and was not really a massive fan of normal gym stuff. Like I'll go in there and I'll use the treadmill and I'll leave, you know. So I like combat sports. So I went back into Thai boxing at the Grip House in Glasgow. And then when I moved to London to do my master's at the Royal Academy of Music, I wanted to continue doing combat sports, and I went to a gym there. Met my coach, Noel Callan, who's still my coach now, and he got me into boxing and absolutely fell in love with the sport. So a really late starter, but someone that is just super obsessive and loves learning new stuff. So yeah, it worked out well.
How many years have you been boxing for now?
So that's coming up, if you include my sort of like box fit days, maybe 10 years. 10 years. Is that, do you consider that to be a long time in boxing, or are you still learning things day to day? Absolutely not a long time in boxing at all. I learn something new every single day when it comes to boxing, and like I think that's one of the best things about the sport. You can never learn everything, and there's so many different styles and techniques and things you can apply to improve yourself that you're never going to run out of stuff. So yeah, I would say I'm a relative baby in the sport in comparison to some other people. Awesome.
And Andrew, how many years have you been in boxing for?
A lot of years.
Dinosaur, right?
Yeah, this is it. I was lecturing some kind of undergrads, and we spoke about the time before internet, which was like a holy shit moment for most of them. It's like, yeah, wow, I grew up without internet. So yeah, quite a long time, but probably not the sports science side. It's probably only been the last 12 years tops. Before that, I was stabbing in the dark, trying to see what works, what wouldn't work.
So how did you guys get to work together?
No.
No, Callum, yeah. Ears will be burning.
My coach. So I happened to bump into Andrew actually down in Glasgow at the Quintet gym, and some of the fighters that he works with, they had a show coming up, and I was meant to be on that show. So I was still doing some training in the gym, but I was actually moving. My fight had just been planned for later on, the world title fight. So I actually was going to do some commentary, and I was doing some pads with Noel. And Noel and Andrew were chatting about various things. Andrew was talking about something else, and Noel kind of was like listening in, always trying to learn something new from the people around us. And yeah, that's how they started talking. Oh, do you think we could improve Hannah and do this, this, and this? And that's kind of where it snowballed. And that's when the What Bike Hell started. So yeah.
I knew we were going to mention that.
Yep.
Tell us about it, Hannah. What happened with the What Bike?
So I don't enjoy cycling. It's never been something I've enjoyed. I think because I lived at the end of a glen, there was never any flat roads to cycle on anyway. It was always like mountain biking, like bouldering over stuff on a bike. So I've never really been into the bike. And then when I started working with Andrew, he was like, right, we're going to use this to increase this, this, and this. And I was like, what, like actual cycling on a bike? I'm not into that. And it was basically caused a vast amount of trauma. And Andrew can go into the details of like what it involves, but basically it's my least favorite session of the entire week. However, it has paid off massively, and there was great improvements in my world title fight that I can only say it was down to the What Bike. And yeah, it doesn't make me happy to say that, but it's true.
That's really interesting, because I guess most people, maybe people that don't know, even people that don't know boxing very well, when you think about conditioning for boxing, you think about running. So Andrew, can you tell us a bit more about why the What Bike, and what did you try to do with Hannah on that implement, and how did that change her training compared to what she was maybe doing or not doing before?
So obviously we kind of got together, we did some physiological testing, and Hannah's got phenomenal low end recovery, because we'll get into this in a minute about Hannah's running the altitude center. So the low end was very good, but the high end wasn't, the recovery at the high end wasn't as good as it should have been. And a lot of that was to do with the fact that in the altitude center or altitude, you can't push high intensity. So you can never really train that threshold. So because this particular fight with Maria, we wanted to be able to have good high intensive explosive moments and kind of sustained output. So we had to do some high intensity work, but I didn't want to do anything that was going to put too much pressure on the lower body and the joints. I wanted to keep it fairly low impact. So, and I have a watt bike and I like that bastard. So I thought, let's share the pain. So we kind of just went through kind of basic kind of interval session work, really, to look at kind of recovery points and slow and fast rates recovery. Because Hannah starts off with quite a nice fast recovery, and then it goes into slow mode, and we just wanted to have a much more fast recovery between rounds. And that's been it. And it's nothing really that difficult in the world of sports science, but it did pay off massively. But that in part comes in that whole thing that if you've never trained a particular item, and you know that, Sean, and then you suddenly do it, you get quite a fast physiological adaptation. So the key now is we have to keep that watt bike adaptation going, Hannah.
Oh, the misery will never end. Yeah. When I did my last sprint session with the bike, and I came off, I was so happy. But my post I put out about it was like, last watt bike session for now, because I knew it wasn't going anywhere, and it was definitely there to stay. But yeah, no, it's also been quite good for me to have like a new way of pushing myself, and a new way of having to like mentally push myself, because like the things, if you're doing the same things over and over, and you know how far to push yourself and how much more you can give, whereas when you're using something completely new, a piece of equipment which you've actively avoided your whole life, so there was definitely a chance for me to really go deeper in my mental sort of work as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like you said, Hannah, and you as well, Andrew, usually doing something that you've never done or that you haven't done in a long time, you're going to see some pretty good changes pretty quickly. Andrew, how did you figure out through your testing? What did you look at? How did you know that she was lacking that high-end recovery and capacity that you were looking for?
So obviously, we obviously use the Moxie pretty religiously now, right? And that was a big factor. So what I was looking to see was just kind of what was the lower limbs and the upper limbs doing in training sessions, and what the recovery rate was like. And we were basically just looking at oxygenation, kind of looking at, how things were going through the sessions, how the muscles were recovering, the 1 minute recovery points. And we kind of discovered that the recovery wasn't probably as good at the high end. So off the bat of that, we thought, well, how are we going to make these changes quite quick? Because obviously you've got a limited window, say 8 weeks for the camp. The last 2, you don't want pushing it too hard. So I figured we could get the bulk of the good stuff done relatively early. And then the good stuff was becoming so good, I thought, let's just keep it going, because the adaptations were getting there, and that was it. I mean, it was just basically off the back of just standard physiological testing. Just thought, right, this is not recovering as well as we want. The other thing was, where Hannah was, we wanted a bit more leg strength as well.
Yeah.
So we could have went down a conventional S&C route and looked at kind of a lot of single leg work and a lot of squatting and all that type of stuff. But in boxing, and this should come out with the PhD research, is a lot of boxing is predicated on muscular endurance over the rounds. So it's about how do you get the best mesh for that individual athlete. Hannah doesn't really love conventional S&C. So there's absolutely no point in making her do conventional S&C, because you're not going to get the maximal output you want. So you have to play around with it. So the watt bike was like a nice kind of middle ground. It was to me.
Nice is not the word I'd use.
And it just gave us that really good thing. And the other thing is Hannah's super competitive. So anything that can produce a metric that can be kind of smashed is going to work really, really well. And I think, some S&C, you could obviously do RSI testing or counter movement jump testing, but it comes down to kind of, how applicable really is it to that particular athlete. So, it's kind of went well.
Yeah, Hannah, how did that watt bike training impact your feeling on in the ring when you were boxing? How did it transfer?
So I think, first of all, like Andrew said, I was looking for more strength in my legs and more balance. And actually, whilst I was using the watt bike, I was trying to be more sort of even on both sides of my legs. So the first one I did, I was watching it, I was like, why am I going real heavy on one side and not the other side? So I was trying to work on that side of it as well. So I was much more balanced. And on fight night, my stepping back and landing and stopping, I always just be quite fluid and not so balanced myself. So that definitely played a part in that as well. And just by the end of it, I was really glad that I did all that extra work on the bike, because this is the first time I boxed 10 rounds on the back foot. So I could feel it in my legs. This is the first time I'd ever felt that in the front of my thighs. I was like, oh my God, this is horrendous. Why would people do this every fight? But yeah, I think I came out of the ring and we went downstairs. By the time I got to the changing rooms, and I said to Noel, I'm only going to say it once, but I'm glad I was on the watt bike, because I can't feel my legs right now. And if I hadn't done that work, I know they wouldn't have been able to stand up and actually execute the game plan that we had in place. So yeah, for me, it was it was positive, but also worrying, because it meant I'd be doing more of it.
Yeah, I think about this as well as, I mean, this is where it comes down to kind of, I guess the difference between what we do and other, you know, kind of people that do training is that we live and breathe boxing. So we know boxing sport. And that makes a big difference, because if you just go and get sports tested by someone that doesn't know the sport, you'll get a very generic program. And we had a very specific game plan that the Hannah's coach Noel had come up with the fight. And I know boxing, so I can understand the game plan. So I can say, right, we need acceleration, we need deceleration, we need braking motion, and we need to be able to, you know, perpetually kind of create that time and time again. So that just allows us to really dial in a program that's really specific, and it all kind of came together really good. I mean, from start to end was phenomenal. I mean, it was kind of funny going through the data, because the data never really lies, and just seeing that initial recovery, and then see that, and other things like just kind of explosive power movements, just dramatically, constantly going up on a linear scale, recovery constantly going down. It just came together so well that balance was good, time was good, distance was good, hand speed was going up, everything was just going up and up and up. And you're waiting for the plateau, because you know it's going to come. But I think in this case, we just timed it, partly maybe through a little bit of luck, but we just timed it to perfection, that the peak happened right. Because there was a little bit of a point where we're wondering, when was the peak and when was it kind of the trough going to happen? And we were lucky, it worked out really, really well. So, but that comes down to Hannah's work ethic as well, because she's like an absolute savage. So she'll just constantly work, which not all athletes do. So, you know, when you're an athlete that's very driven, very focused, and puts maximal effort in, only good things are going to occur. So it was good. It was a good camp. Worked out actually really, really well.
Hannah, do you feel like had you maybe done this kind of work in running, do you think you would have had potentially the same returns, or was this something maybe special or different about the bike that allowed you to feel so well in the legs?
I love how you two both keep saying the word special when it comes to like, these things don't go together for me. But yeah, no, I think like obviously I do, as Andrew will probably explain later, but I do a lot of my cardio at the altitude center here in London. So at, you know, however many thousand feet it's at, and running at high altitude, I've always done my sprints there. So like my recovery has been really, really good. But then I don't think I can, well, as I've learned later on, I can't max out to my full capacity in there, because your body just will not allow it. Like, you know, the first time I went in there, like it wasn't the breathing that caused me problems, it was the lactic buildup. You know, I found that it was just so, and it just wouldn't go away. You know, it was really hard to work with. And I like running, I like sprinting, I like the competition with that. So for me, it's never like, oh, it's the sprint session. Whereas when it sprints on a bike, it's a whole other thing. And I had to really push myself a lot harder to achieve it. So I'm quite grateful to it, because it made me find that next level in my mind about how to do this, how to get through it, what I'm gonna do to make myself better. And it's like that sort of really sick, twisted sort of thing where you're like, I know this is gonna hurt, but I really want to get to that next bit, that I want those numbers to change to here. So I want to achieve that more than I'm upset about how much this is killing me. Like, it's just like that super competitive. So I've always been like that with myself. So I think with running, I always know I've got it. And there's stuff I can always work on. But with the bike, there's other things that come into play a lot more. And it's interesting.
Yeah. We should probably add that the bike has been done it's not in the altitude. We're not doing the bike sprints at altitude. And that, I mean, that's the interesting thing for me, was that the altitude training provides a really nice kind of cardiac output level. So you get that nice kind of stroke volume, get that nice kind of left ventricle development and all that good stuff. But it's not brilliant for high intensity work, because you just can't push that hard. And we needed that, because in boxing, as you look through conventional boxing data, you'll see that the heart rate peak goes up and the VO2 kinetics show up very early on. So you need to be able to sustain and maintain that. So you can only train it certain ways. And the other big thing that a lot of people do incorrectly, in my opinion, is there's a lot heavy emphasis on upper body work, like landmine pressing, and try to develop shoulder strength without appreciating that everything's coming from the ground up. So if that foundation is not solid enough, you're just making a house that's going to topple. So for us with Hannah, it was a case we need to do strength work for the lower legs, which we did, but we needed to look at ways of creating obviously all that super science and mitochondrial kind of density increase and all that good stuff. So we did that. The bikes was just a great way of doing it. And it's the other thing is it's not time consuming. So you can get the session done.
Yeah.
You know, there's no point struggling in a session for 40 minutes when we know we can condense it into maybe like a 10-minute session or whatever and get the work done for the day. And that's the key thing as well.
Also, I think for me, like the difference, I never really thought that, I always thought I was quite strong with my legs. I always thought my legs were quite strong. So when we did the testing and stuff, it really showed a whole load of information that I didn't really realize. And I always just put my like unbalancedness to basically being stupidly clumsy, because I always have been as a child. Everyone's like, Hannah, you're so clumsy. And I grew really quick, so I was falling over myself all the time. And it's actually some of the sort of unbalanced stuff is probably in my head a lot of the time because I panic about where I want to be. But like strengthening my legs and actually doing specific work on that, this camp has been really fascinating for me, because suddenly I'm more balanced, I'm less wobbly, and in the ring it's just really changed things around. I feel strong and solid when I'm there. I'm less likely to get pushed off and much more balanced. So yeah, the whole testing side of it was really interesting because it showed me something completely different to what I thought. I always thought my legs were super strong, but actually there were things that could be done to make me more balanced and much stronger.
Is there other aspects of your training that have changed maybe significantly since you started working with Andrew?
I think so. We've added in some more sort of high intensity work on the bag, and because I can go at one sort of pace for a round, and it's quite a quick pace, and I'm good at putting the pressure on, but I want to be able to have little bursts of more speed combinations and then come back out of it, so go up and then come back down, and we've been looking at that and using a heart rate monitor a lot more, which I've never used it before. So actually applying that into work on the bag, on the pads, and then also testing like my speed when the difference between the bags and the pads, that was fascinating too. But just overall adding in a heart rate monitor has shown some really interesting data that I had never thought about.
What were the main things that came out for you? And then maybe Andrew, you can go on that as well. Why might it be a good idea for a boxer to use a heart rate monitor in training?
Well, for me, we were talking about like trying to maintain, like, when do I best recover? At what heart rate do I best recover? And actually, there was times when I was just going all out all the time, and I wasn't really using, like, I wasn't taking my time in the ring to recover. And whereas I could be more explosive at a certain point, recover, and then be explosive again, instead of kind of like maintaining this in the middle sort of thing, which is good, but you can always do more with it. And I think Andrew will probably expand a bit more on that. But
so you have to think about kind of the round duration. So obviously Hannah's in a 2-minute round. So what we're kind of looking at is, when does the heart rate recover the best in the round? Is it beginning round or is it the end of the round? And, you know, and when are the VO2 kinetics kicking in? So where are we seeing the best opportunities to do the most high amount of volume in the round? So these are the kind of things we always kind of look at. We're looking to really dial in what's actually occurring in that 2-minute or 3-minute window, and how is the boxer responding. So if a boxer goes into, say, an opportunity where they see their opponent is fairly exploited and they throw a vicious set of combinations, how quick are they going to recover from that? And can they then sustain it through repeated bouts through that round? A good example is probably Dean in his last fight. Dean Sutherland, who's picked up the kind of WBC silver, that we trained Dean in a kind of similar way to Hannah. There's a lot of dissimilarity as well, but the same concept, that we need him to be explosive and maintain it, and then back away, and then go back and recover, and to understand when that's happening intuitively. Yeah. Because a lot of times in training and boxing, what happens is boxers do a bag session with no real structure as to why they're doing the bag session. They're just hitting the bag for the sake of hitting the bag, right? And that's like a real pet hate of mine. I get fucking lots of them. So I'm kind of like the most miserable person on the planet. But one of the reasons I have an issue with that is, you know, familiarity breeds content and all that type of stuff. And the more that you do sloppy stuff, the more it transfers into practice. Yeah. So you need to be drilling that bag specifically, and especially in a fight camp, it needs to be drilled specifically for that particular fight camp. So by watching Hannah in the bags and the pads, we're able to see that there's particular points in the round where maybe she backs away, where the gas tank is full and it's not been used, or it vice versa, the other way around, maybe parts in the round that So a lot of it was trying to get Hannah to intuitively feel when she felt she needs to put the brakes on.
Mm.
And then when you put the brakes on, that's a bigger context, because at that point, your boxer has to be defensively capable and cognizant. So there's no point kind of putting the brakes on if you're very exploited and you're dropping your hands. So there's a myriad of things that take place that are other than just physiological tests, that all leads into that whole overall performance blueprint. And, you know, Hannah's very analytical, so she can break all that down and go, right, I feel that, I feel this. Some boxers can't do that, so you have to do it through different visual cues. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of stuff in there.
I guess what comes to mind is just the integration of the physiological parameters with the strategy and the technique as well in the ring for you, Hannah, right? So what do you feel now that you have a better sense of when you can push, when you have to hold back a little bit, and maybe what strategies to use in those different moments?
Yeah, I think it's something that I'm still learning a lot about, because this is all really recent for me, like, you know, after this last camp. So it's why I'm actually super excited about my next camp, because there's all this stuff that I now have a kind of an idea about, and how we're going to use it, and like what we're going to build, or what we're going to change, what we're going to do. And that's why I'm excited about learning more about it. But for me, yes, there's definitely things like in the ring now I can actually feel things a lot more, and I know how my body's reacting. Because I think in boxing sometimes, like when you're doing stuff on the bags, like I've watched before people doing things, it's like you just kind of go like, oh, work harder, work harder, work harder. But like, you know, and I've never understood that, because like if you're just working hard, but there seems to be no point to why you're working hard, or what are you trying to achieve at that moment in time, and actually, are you not tiring your body out? And wouldn't it be better to be explosive for a few seconds for this, then come back and then go again? So it's that sort of thing. So it's changing that mindset for certain stuff. And I'm starting to learn more, which is, it's just interesting. And it's cool when you see it happen for yourself. You're like, oh, I knew that. I knew that. And I could feel that. And that's like finally like that kind of the pin drops moment. It's like, it takes a little bit of time, but it does come.
Yeah. Andrew, so what do you look at? Do you only look at the heart rate? Do you have an eye on the Moxie as well when you're trying to determine those kind of high intensity zones for her and those recovery zones for her? How do you look at it, and how do you organize it?
So we're obviously looking at data through a variety of certain disciplines. So we're looking at like a 515 type test, for looking for certain attributes off of the back of that. But probably for us, it's this whole thing about looking at what is the body doing with the Moxie on a pad session, what's it doing in a heavy bag session, what's it doing in a spar session, and is there a correlation between any of it? Because it's something. The crazy thing about boxing is, especially in pro boxing, is we don't have any real research in the underlying physiological nature of it. So we're still kind of stabbing in the dark. But what I'm looking to see is there consistent factors that reappear time after time. So is Hannah perhaps too heavy in the front leg? Is she maybe bleeding energy in the front leg? Is she not able to cope with being on the back foot? Is the clinch position showing a desaturation? And off the back of that, I'll just then make suggestions to Noel, and then Noel will implement that. And Noel will use all his expertise in that area, where he'll go, right, well, we're going to put this into pad session, we're going to drill this particular thing. And this is where it's really super important. It's a joined up approach, because I can give X amount, but I need a good coach to be able to step in and go, right, we'll do this, we'll bring this in here, and we'll add this in here. And then it has to become practical, because you need to apply the science. If you're just doing numbers for the sake of numbers, it's a complete waste of time. Yeah. That number has to transfer into something that's practical, you know, and something that's going to have an outcome that you're going to see and be able to kind of conceptually measure. And that's what we do, which is probably why my approach gels with some people. But if you're an all-style coach, it's probably not for you. Because it is a lot about the, because the end thing is like we all have a vested interest in Hannah going to win this world title fight. So there's no ego. It's just shave this off here, add this on here, right? You're talking shit, take that off that bit here. And that has to be the process. It has to be about Hannah and how she moves forward. Boxing is still a little bit trapped in that whole zone of egos and people with slick back hair want to be on Instagram, and not enough focus about what actually needs to be occurring. Yeah. And the physiological testing will take you so far, but boxing is still, the technical side of it is still the ultimate aim. The aim is still to take this data and then say, right, how can we make the glenohumeral joint come into place a bit better so that we get throughput, so that the right hand cross is coming on the straight line and it's not deviating. So there's a myriad of things that are taking place in camp that probably Hannah's not aware of, because me and Noel are bouncing back things and you know, and Noel will be saying, you know, this is not happening, we're not seeing this, how do we tighten this up? And And that's what I love about it. That's the exciting part, is it's like a big detective story, trying to work out what the hell is going on. And it's really fascinating. I love it. I love it to bits.
Hannah, were you open to that, let's say maybe novel approach for most people right off the bat, or did you have some resistance to it at first?
Not at all. No, I think from anybody that knows myself and Noel, we've always done it our way, and we've literally we've taken all the information that we can possibly have to make me a better fighter. And my coach Noel, he doesn't have an ego. It's not about him. It's not about him being the famous coach or anything like that. And because we started really from like the bottom, we didn't have any amateur. I didn't have an amateur experience. He got his license to take me pro. Like we're always kind of fighting that, oh, are you going to achieve it sort of thing. So as far as he was concerned, we're a team, and we get everything in we need to make me a better fighter every single time. And that's just how it's worked. And I think it's quite sad when I see especially happens with females and their coaches. Like, I feel like the girls, the coaches get very jealous of them because there's not a lot of us. So like when you get a female fighter, you kind of want to keep hold of her, but you don't want her to go off somewhere else. Whereas Noel's never been like against me doing pads. Like, he'll often ask people. So once when I was in America, we came across Corey Spinks in a gym, which is probably one of the coolest things that ever happened. And he was like, explain
who he is for people who don't know the boxing world?
So Corey Spinks is an amazing boxer. Anybody, if you've not watched any of his fights, go on YouTube and watch his fights. He was a super slick sort of southpaw, fantastic fighter. And like, I just saw him, he was having a nap beside the ring. And he just woke up as I was doing pads with Noel. And he's like, oh, I know you fought Clarissa Shields, and this. And first of all, I was completely blown away that he knew who I was. And secondly, he was like, oh, are you working on this, working on that? And Noel said, oh, do you want to take one of the pads? And he was like, yeah, hour and a half later, I'm knackered. But, I've learned loads of cool stuff. And I think some trainers are really closed-minded to that sort of idea. And like, for us to go and work with someone like Andrew and put the science behind it, boxing is still really plagued by this whole old school is best school attitude, which is just nonsense, because you look at every single other sport out there and they're really super advanced with how they're moving forward. They're putting the science into everything, the recovery, all of that. And then boxing still seems to be sometimes in the complete dark ages, and they're still getting them to do these ridiculous exercises. Like, it's just bizarre. And I don't understand it, because we have moved forward, time has moved forward, and things do advance, but people seem really closed to new ideas. So yeah, it's a funny one, but we've never been like that. So as soon as Andrew came on board, it was all about teamwork. How are we going to make me better? And often, they'll be talking about stuff, because I can't take it all on, because I've got a million other things, like, thinking about winning my world title all the time. So
you have to be an athlete at some point.
Yeah, exactly. I got to do the rest of the stuff. So I think it's great. And you've got to trust your coach, you've got to trust the team around you, and that's why I'm super sort of team oriented. I like to know exactly who's in my team, what their position, role is, and how we're all working together to create the outcome. That's what I want it to be about. It's not about one person.
And Andrew, how was your, say, integration into the team? I guess you knew Hannah's coach before already.
Well, it was kind of funny because Noel just gate crashed the conversation I was having about sports science. So we were in Aberdeen, it was Aberdeen, yeah, for Billy and Dean's World Youth title fights. And I was always chatting about carbohydrate intakes, and Noel gate crashed, basically, in a nutshell. Just kind of walked in and sat on the kind of footstooly thing and went, we need to chat. and that was kind of it. And then spoke away, and we spoke about things. And then the following day we were over, I think we were just kind of over to get them loosened up before the fight, I think it was.
Yeah.
And then Hannah was there with Noel doing some pads and things, and started chatting away, and then we kind of spoke about doing some physiological testing, and then that was the start of the walk bike saga. So Hannah came up to Aberdeen, did a couple of days of testing. We did everything from lactate testing right through to like a modified 515 on the bike, which Hannah didn't like. There's a trend here, Hannah. Bikes.
The first testing was so. It's funny because with the first testing that we did, I was super disappointed with my scores. Yeah, I was super disappointed with how it went and everything like this. So the next time we did it, I was so determined that it was going to be totally different and stuff like that. But like, it was the first time I'd ever done that sort of testing, and everyone said to me, Hannah, you've got to have a base level. but that's just like it, like my natural response was that shit, it's got to be better. So like I just was super competitive right from the beginning with it, and I think that's what kind of drew me into it. I didn't know about the watt bike then. But yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because this is a good, the testing is a good example of applied sports science, right? Because one of the things we wanted to do at Hannah was do substrate evaluation using the portable metabolic device. And that particular kit that we had was, what do you say, well, shit. We had a lot of problems with the mass, we had a lot of problems with it. And at that point, you know, if you get a lot of experience in sports science, you go, well, you know what, we can get that data in a different way. So we don't need to really rely on it. And at that point, that was an interesting turning point for me as well, because I ditched using the metabolic cart, the portable one, but managed to still extrapolate out from the Moxie a lot of more kind of, I guess, theoretical concepts of fat mass construction and VT1, VT2 out of that. But suddenly that reinforced my PhD a little bit more. And we've taken substrate testing out of part of the PhD because we think we can find it in other ways. So there was an interesting one for me that day as well. So it was a big learning curve for me as well, because some things just didn't go the way it was planned to go, which is always the case. But it was an interesting day. And I think what was interesting for me is that you always try and tell athletes, testing days are not about winning and they're not about failing. They just are. You know, it's just a baseline.
It's an evaluation, right?
Yeah. But some athletes, Hannah, kind of still want to try and go to the extremes, and they make for interesting evaluations. Because then I'm looking at the evaluation thinking, well, I'm trying to baseline this. And this is not going to be baselined because Hannah's pushing too hard. So I had to kind of put the red pen out and go F. But so my evaluation with boxers is, and I think I spoke about this in the other one as well, podcast, is we go through everything from movement assessment right through to specific boxing testing, including sparring. So sparring is a fundamental test because we need to see how that body differs in a spar, both from a movement point of view, from a cardiopulmonary point of view, and from a biomechanics point of view and everything else, how it differs to the training methods. Because a lot of times sparring is, and sparring is one of these things as well, doesn't always go brilliant either in a test. So and boxing is such a brutal sport and there's so many complexities to it. It's such a beautiful sport and a lot of people don't understand it. It's such a technically precise sport that there's so many variables. And you know, and this is what I say to other coaches as well that want to kind of do what we're doing. It takes a lot of data and a lot of analysis of data, and nobody likes the data analysis, do they, Sean? It's kind of it's a lot of work to try to see what the fuck is actually going on and making head or tail of it, you know?
Yeah. You gotta really like the numbers to dig into them and then come back out of that number rabbit hole, I guess, with something valuable to bring to the athlete and the coaches as well. Hannah, something you brought up before that I wanted to come back to is the difference that there is maybe between women in boxing and men in boxing. It's a men-dominated sport. I'm sure it's fairly straightforward to say that. Can you talk a little bit about your experience in that realm from that perspective, being a woman in a men-dominated sport? I assume, I don't know, but I assume there's a majority of men coaches as well. I don't know if there's a lot of women coaches in boxing. So maybe you could just take that off.
Yeah, so obviously it is a male-dominated sport. Like when I started, like you go to gyms for sparring, and like they still didn't have female toilets. Like the boxing gyms were just for boys. That's just like a really basic thing. But you know, Noel's always been really good at talking to me about, like, we always have very open discussions about, like, so my period and like that time of the month and when that happens and how I respond and how my body feels, because I still, like, as soon as you try and talk about that, it used to be the case anyway, quite a few coaches, you mentioned that and they all kind of choke and just walk away. Like they just don't even know what to say to you because they're like, I don't know anything about this. Yeah, they just know nothing about it. And it's not something they've ever talked about or want to talk about, you know, but actually it makes a real difference for us. You know, for me, I know prior to actually coming on my period, my reflexes and my coordination aren't as good. And also, like, I need to eat more. I want to sleep more, you know, and also during that time, your body hurts more. So there's lots of other things that are changed by that. Also, obviously, because it's mainly about weight, we do put on water weight. So like for the WBC, the World Boxing Council, they actually allow a £2 water weight allowance for women when they're fighting for titles. The other governing bodies do not allow that for a world title. So it's managing like your time of the month. Like I'm on the pill because that means that I can control it better. And I know a lot of other athletes in all sports are actually on the pill because it means you can control your timings better. It just means you don't come on a competition day. Also, it affects your hormones and your emotionals. So there's days when just before I'm due to come on, I'll come in the gym and Noel will be like, today you're going to work on the bag, and we're not really going to talk much, because I'm horrible. I'm just horrible, snappy and moody about irrational, stupid things. And also, obviously, when you're in camp and you're cutting weight, it makes you even more horrible. So yeah, it's actually quite an important part of it. It does make a difference. I never spar on those days. That's just the rules, because I don't know my lefts and rights. Like I'm literally doing something I think I'm doing one thing and I'm going the other way. So yeah, it does make a difference and an impact on sports. So that's one of the differences, I suppose physically and mentally that we've got to deal with. Also, things like having children. And if you decide to have a child as a professional, there's quite a few females that I know that have done that. But then coming back in again, there's always the thing, can you still take body shots, or has that been affected? And how you work around that, and whether or not mentally actually having a child, this does affect guys too, having a child, how it affects your outlook when you're in the gym. Can you, are you actually fully focusing on your job, or are you obviously thinking about your kids, which is obviously understandable. So there's that side of it as well. Obviously the differences for women and guys, the really obvious one is we just don't get paid the same. That's a massive situation for us, and I find that really frustrating because I bleed the same, I sweat the same, I work just as hard, and I still don't get paid the same. So yeah, that's one side of it too. So I think as well for nutrition, things as that can play a part in it as well. So there's loads of different things which actually is very different for guys and girls, but maybe stuff that people don't think about.
Yeah, Andrew, I'll let you maybe respond to this right after. One thing I want to bring up, and Hannah, I appreciate your openness and willingness to talk about all those important things on a podcast like this. You're talking about your period. I just had the case a few days ago where a young lady came in for some testing, a good runner, and it was that day where she doesn't feel good, where she's got cramps, where her belly hurts, her stomach hurts, and I just said, you know what, we're not going to do tests today. There's no point in doing an assessment today on the one day of the 28 that is going to yield some results that are probably not going to be representative of who you are, of what you can do. And that is not a good baseline. And so I just said, come back in 3 or 4 days when you feel better, and we'll do it then. And like you said, I think, and that's something that I've talked about before in the podcast, and I think is extremely important. And it's why I want to spend a bit of time on it for us, men, and any man who works with female athletes needs to at least get a basic understanding of how this affects a woman's physiology, psychology, hormonal status, and everything else, so that we can better communicate with you guys, so that we can have an open and adult conversation about those important topics. And like you said, just, okay, there's days where things are going to be on the table. There's days where things are going to be off the table, and every woman's different in that regard as well. And so there's not going to be a blanket statement about this is how it's going to be. It's about, no, you're going to have to just man up, and then you're going to have to talk, and you're going to just have to be okay with, spending that time discussing this. But I think what I've seen at least is, if as a man talking about those issues with a woman, if you're open about it, and if you show that you're empathetic and that you understand, the conversation kind of loosens up really quickly, and you're able to just talk about it without any of the taboo that is still unfortunately linked to those topics.
Yeah, no, definitely agree with that. And I think it's funny because Noel was talking to quite a few other coaches. I think he had to do one of his training days for like a medical thing or something like that. And they came onto the topic of female fighters, and they were like, oh, of course they can go and speak to a female coach or somebody that's working there. And Noel was like, how about you just ask them yourselves, have a conversation? It shouldn't be a taboo topic.
No.
And I think for especially young female fighters as well, when you're the only girl in the gym, is it a topic you actually want to talk about in front of all the boys? Is it something like, is it still thought of as kind of like, I don't want to say anything about it? And I've seen girls be complained at for their weight when actually they just don't want to say they're on their periods. They put on 2 pounds of water, and like the coach is giving them hell because like, oh, you're 2 pounds heavier. Why are you 2 pounds heavier? And all this sort of stuff. And it's like, if you just said, yeah, like science, this is literally what's happening to my body is natural, and that happens. So yeah, it's one of those sort of tricky things that I think we need to actually talk about a lot more.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. Andrew?
Yeah, I know, I totally agree. And I think there's a lot of coaches that are training female fighters like male fighters.
Yeah.
And they're not understanding even the difference in the rule sets and the 2 minutes versus 3 minutes, and the need to kind of then slightly change up kind of aerobic and anaerobic contributions. And I've been very fortunate that all my coaching, most of my successful athletes have been females. So I've spent a lot of time with female athletes. And I always said this, I always find female athletes probably give a bit more than a lot of male athletes do.
Yeah.
A bit more competitive. But I think definitely menstrual cycle, things like relative energy deficit syndrome, the red syndrome and all these things are very prevalent things to be really conscious about. And I think this is not just a boxing thing, because you see this in gymnastics as well, that there's some pretty horrific conditions taking place in gymnastics for females. They've been pushed to breaking points because there's even female coaches not really prepared enough to kind of sit back and look at, the menstrual cycle, when things are kicking in, when they're not, when there has to be recovery, when there has to be days off. And probably more importantly, the psychological side of it. There's a lot of berating and bringing down female athletes without coaches being fully understanding where they are on their cycle. So it does need to change. How that changes, I really don't know. I think
it's hard.
I think the problem is, I've been through lots of training courses. I've done Boxing Scotland courses, I've done the British board. I don't recall female athletes ever coming up once as a topic in any of those courses. When I think about it now, I don't remember it ever coming up. I've done plenty of strength conditioning courses, master's degrees, blah, 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 blah. Again, I'm trying to think. The only time that female athletes has come up is in my PhD with John Barber's my supervisor, where he said we need to look at, and we need to be spending a lot of focus on looking at female athletes and how they fit into things because they're underrepresented.
But also, I think as well, we should remember in the UK, like women weren't actually allowed to box until 1990 or something ridiculous like that. Crazy, like literally crazy. Like that's madness. They weren't allowed, and the reason they weren't allowed to have professional licenses because we were, I quote, unstable due to menstrual cycles. But that was actually used as an excuse. That was actually used as a reason as to why women shouldn't be allowed to box, because we were unstable, mentally unstable, which is great. I know a lot of guys will say that about their partners or their girls that they know, and I can put my hand up and say there are times when I'm not most stable. However, the point is that is not an excuse to not allow women to do a sport. And that was an excuse from men. That was a fully male excuse. There wasn't a woman on there giving an advice or anything like that. That was men deciding that women should not do something because of their menstrual cycle, which I think's really, really nuts. On the other side of it, I think it's one of the things that needs to be looked at is obviously when females are cutting down to really, really low weights, it affects your menstrual cycle, whether it'll happen or not. Some people, I know some female fighters who have been right down at very low weights, and 6 months nothing happens, and it's not good, it's not natural, it's not normal for your body. But it's like, is there science being put into how low that you can safely go? And then when, is that going to affect you having children at some point? Whereas with guys, when you're cutting down weight, obviously malnutrition, all that sort of stuff, it's not good, but is it affecting them actually having kids? Does that affect them doing something with their lives? I don't know. So it's just something that's not really talked about.
I think one of the things that I kind of found when we did a lot of provisional research when we were going to look at rest and metabolic rate and the changes through camps, was that one of the things we were quite keen to look at was weekly gas analysis to look at how your rest and metabolic rate was changing on a weight cut. and rapid weight cuts definitely have long-term physiological and metabolic issues. And as soon as you start getting into kind of endocrinology and you start getting into kind of gynecological issues, you start to see there is something there. It's definitely an area that needs a lot more research. The problem we have in sports like boxing is there's no hunger to do that type of research.
No.
You know, and that's a big issue because, you know, we need a lot more research on males and females when it comes to kind of how these long-term weight cutting effects are really going to manifest themselves in later life, because it's clearly going to do something, you know. And it's like, and this is one of the things I have issues, not just with female boxers, but with male boxers in camps that they're making them cut crazy. I mean, Han, I'll tell you, I'm not a big lover of crash weight cutting. I'm kind of, it's not my thing. I don't do water loading. I don't do any of that thing, because the reality is when a boxer retires, maybe at 30, 31, 32, they have got to have a normal life after it. Mm-hmm. So we can't punish, and we should, and coaches should be better at it. And it's one of the things that drives me balmy, use a Scottish word, is coaches need to be better educated in these things. Boxing coaches need to be better educated in these things. Auxiliary staff need to be better educated in these things. We can't let this crap continue forever. You know, this ignorance. You know, we need to, you know, some of us are out there getting ecstatic over spreadsheets and research papers and things that are coming through. And then you get coaches that just don't care. They just turn up, they do the same thing, the same way they've been doing it for the last 15 years. And it's not their responsibility when the fighter leaves. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think we should be accountable. We need to be accountable, because it's the only way we're going to make the sport drive forward, you know, all sports. So I think it's a massive area. How you tackle it, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It's difficult.
I think it needs to be tackled at the beginning stage, you know, like in the amateurs, when you've got these kids, like these children are boiling themselves down to ridiculous weights. And it's just like, you're like 11 years old, but you're like, you know, are you actually, and the thing is, there's not enough information for them out there about nutritionally what they should be eating, what their body should be getting in. Like, I get a lot of messages through social media from parents asking about this, especially their daughters, actually. Like, their daughters have been in one weight class, and it's been the summer holidays, they've come back, and now they just won't stop eating, they just won't, and like, you know, they're just growing so quickly, and I don't know if they're going to be able to make the weight. And I was like, it's your child. A child grows, you know, and especially with, you know, your children will grow. They will go into different weight classes, and they are allowed to eat. Children need to actually be able to eat properly, have the right nutrition going in, so they can form properly as a human.
Yeah, and especially at their younger years. I mean, like you said, it's one thing, Andrew, like you, and that's a very good point to put forward. You want to retire as a boxer healthy, or as healthy as you can be, and not be metabolically compromised. But if you start inflicting those restrictions on kids at a young age, I mean, how are they going to get out on the other side on the good foot?
I mean, I had an interest. I got a call, it was a couple of months back, by someone about their child, you know, and they were going to do, I think it was a kickboxing tournament somewhere, and you know, the kid obviously went through a growth spurt.
Yeah.
And you know, the kid was sitting about, I think, 56 kilos or something, and had previously fought at 42. And the parents and the coach were still trying to get the kid to cut to 42. You know, and I was like, what the fuck is going on here? You know, and the sad part was, they were trying to get me to come on as a sports scientist, and the nutritionist was proactively trying to make this cut. Mm-hmm. And I was like, what are you doing? You know, you can't do that. The kid needs to go up a weight category. But it came down to the fact that this kid was going to be on an Olympic cycle for another sport, and if they don't make the weight, it's a good chance they're going to lose the kind of funding sponsorship. And it was over, I think it was over in Ireland, so whatever the sport institute is for Ireland, they were going to take them off the program. And I've seen this a few times previously with taekwondo athletes, female taekwondo athletes that are trying to make the Team GB squad. There's been a heavy push to maintain weight, and you're thinking to yourself, you need to do a different sport, because you're not going to make those weight categories. But when you start seeing 12 and 13-year-old kids being forced into weight categories, you think to yourself, somebody needs a slap somewhere, and it's not the kid. You know, because that's just craziness. You know, you're compromising immune function at such an early age, especially young females. You know, I mean, I've in the past, I've seen parents kind of contact some of the organizations I work with about trying to suppress periods in young children and young females and stuff, so they can make their tournaments. And you're thinking, come on, no tournament is worth that amount putting a child. I mean, to a certain extent, it's almost like a form of child abuse. You know, they're kind of restricting calorie intake in their kids. It's just, you know, and you see in America with these like young cheerleader girls and all this type of stuff, and they're trying to keep kids as kids, you know, and just kind of, I just don't agree with it. It just horrifies me. Some elements of sport. It's just.
I've talked to some of the pro fighters now, right, and they were telling me some stories about when they were amateurs and when they had to make weight for certain things, and you know they're in their teenage years, and like some of the advice was, just don't eat for a couple of days and cut your water out at this point, and it's just like, you know, the kid's 13, it's 13, 14. Why? That shouldn't be something that's said to a child, you know. And we all go on about how, you know, with children, like it's a worry that our kids are getting obese and that sort of thing for your health and stuff like that. And kids should be encouraged, but then they shouldn't be shamed for their bodies as children. But then you've got the other extreme this way, when kids are being made to be like tiny little humans and they don't actually grow properly, and you know that can stunt their growth, and lack of nutritional intake at the important times, especially like, you know, like you said, if you've had a growth spurt and then you're being told to fit back down 10 kilos, it's never going to work.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in some boxing gyms, you know, and when I was in my early 20s, where you had like 14-year-olds in bin bags on bikes trying to cut weight for amateur fights, and you're like, you know, why? I mean, and it shouldn't happen nowadays, because every amateur boxing club has to have like a child protection officer. Yeah. So, you know, I've done that recently for our club, and you're meant to be aware of all these things. You know, these things should not happen. But you still see it. I mean, I've been to shows, and you maybe get an 18-year-old lad that's obviously trying to cut weight for that show, and you'll have seen that, and they're in sweating away in the sauna, well, wet. They got a bloody bin bag or a you know, a sweatsuit on in a sauna on a bike, and you're thinking, what on earth are you doing?
The question is, why was no one giving you advice earlier on before the fight happened, so that you can get yourself to a safe weight? Yeah. You know, obviously there's always going to be a little bit of water cut at the end when it's for fighting, and I'm not saying that needs to stop altogether. I mean, that's just part of it. However, if you're having to cut like 10 pounds the night before, it's just madness. That's mad. And it's a combat sport, so you're taking impact to your brain. You're cutting 10 pounds of water weight. The amount of water's there to protect your brain, and you're cutting it out. You're never going to fully rehydrate in time for the fight, so therefore you're putting your life at risk.
Can you expand a little bit on this, because that's something that I've heard before? Listen to Joe Rogan a whole bunch. He's my spirit animal, as I like to say. But yeah, dehydration and the brain, and then impacts to the brain and the effect that can have. Can you guys talk a little bit about this? I think it's a very, very important issue or topic that people need to be aware of, especially in combat sports.
So dehydration is a whole, it obviously inhibits performance dramatically, and there's enough research to show that. So your ability to be cognizant and aware on the round decreases quite substantially. So your ability to defend yourself decreases. So the amount of punishment you will then take, and it's obviously a sport where you get hit in the face. So there's no buffer there. And when you start to take all that fluid out, and the brain becomes very exposed, so it's getting a lot more shock. And then you're getting and then if you follow that game plan as an amateur through your career into your pro, the amount of concussive shock that's building up time and time and time again is obviously, we believe, is leading to like CTE and kind of all this kind of long-term brain trauma, and there's been some links to kind of Alzheimer's, and there's been a whole other things. And it's not just unique to boxing, because you see it in American football and all those other sports as well. There's a lot of those sports as well where they're dehydrating down pretty big as well. MMA is probably the worst offender, even still. You know, even though the UFC's released its kind of performance document, there's still a massive component in that shows me that there's still a lot of water cutting taking place at the end that's quite radical. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, it's a sport where you are getting punched or kicked or kneed or elbowed in the face. Why would you compromise your ability to be cognizant and defend yourself and to maximize your performance by taking such a massive dehydration risk? I don't understand it. It's not something we do. It's not been something I've ever done in 25 years of coaching. It's not been something I've ever allowed. Common sense always told me, even before sports science, that probably wasn't the best way of doing something. Because you only have to see your boxer in the ring perform poorly and take punishment. And this is when it gets into a very thorny issue about when do you stop a boxer, because a boxer will fight. They know they won't want to be pulled out. There's a massive responsibility on the coach, and it is a very difficult thing to do as well, but there has to be processes in place. I think we're getting better at it. I think my own personal opinion on it is I think it's a twofold thing. I think a lot of times boxers are becoming a lot more switched on themselves, but not necessarily their coaching staff. And I think there's an interesting dichotomy because I do know a lot of S&C coaches that work with fighters that clearly do not understand nutrition. They do not understand hydration, but they're still informing the bulk of that athlete's, performance plan to the end, and the coach is just accepting it. And I know other boxers that are basically not listening to their S&C coach or the coach and are doing their own management for their weight and hydration status. So we're still not fully married up. I think it's something that English boxing Scotland, the British Board of Control, they need to spend a bit more time on their training material to really emphasize the need to protect the boxers. And that doesn't just mean proper gloves and head guard and groin guard. It means hydration. It means fueling properly for sparring sessions. So I think it's a big issue. I think it's a sport with risk. You can't mitigate it because it is there, but you want to mitigate it as much as possible. There's things you can mitigate. Hydration is one of them. I mean, that's weight cutting, Hannah, I'll tell you, weight cutting's a fascinating thing, because a promoter doesn't necessarily see it how I see it. It's on the phone rings, it's our manager to say, get off that podcast. So example, I've had promoters say to me, your boxer's coming in a little bit light. They're not, they're coming in probably hydrated. It's just, there's a persona as well. People want to see boxers step on to the weights when they're getting their way in and they're totally ripped and glistening and shiny and sparkly, and that isn't necessarily reflective of performance. So I think there's a lot of bits in the sport that need addressed.
Hannah, can you talk about your experience with this, with the nutrition side, the dehydration side, or the hydration side, and its importance, and what your message would be to fighters that might be listening to this and maybe that don't have the chance to have someone like Andrew who's very knowledgeable in all those things, and a coach who's open to hearing them, like your coach is, Hannah. What would be your advice?
I think obviously when it comes to doing a weight cut, I firmly believe you should be cutting your weight throughout the camp, as in you shouldn't be leaving the biggest chunk of your weight cut to the very last minute, because you're not going to feel good after it. You just don't. The one time when I had to cut an extra pound of water weight that I wasn't expecting to, because actually I was in Scotland and it was absolutely fucking freezing and I couldn't sweat. I was wearing 20 coats and I just couldn't do anything, and it was just sitting on me. So yeah, just cutting the weight throughout the camp, and it does affect you in the ring on fight night. There's no two ways about it. You're not going to perform at your best if you're not fully hydrated. That's just how it works, and I'm really fortunate to be sponsored by Science in Sport. So Science in Sport is a supplement company here in the UK. They're Informed Sport, so I know that whenever I get tested for drugs or anything, all of their stuff is triple batch tested. It's all safe for sport. So that sort of supplementation is really useful, and there's lots of science on the website about that sort of those products. But if you're not sure, then you should speak to people about things, and you should also try and be healthy. If you're eating the amount that less than a 5-year-old kid would eat every single day, and that's it, then for one meal, then you're not putting enough food in your system and you can't perform at the best. So it's it is a tricky one, and I think you do need to have a team that is open to talking about it. And if your team won't talk about it, then you need to seek information from other people and places that you trust, for fighters, not fighters or others, people like Andrew or anyone who's going to give you some advice. But just be careful not to go all in with one thing and it not work out. And yeah, it is trial and error. For me, with my weight cut, I know that I don't eat wheat and I don't eat dairy in my weight cut, because dairy sits on me and I have a wheat intolerance. So therefore it makes me hold water. But it's taken me a long time to realize this. It was a lot of trial and error to figure it out. And try and put the right things in my system. When's best? What do I need? So yeah, it does take time, and there isn't an answer for all. Everybody's body is different, and that's something else that people need to remember.
Yeah, and you want to have coaching staff that understand what your walk around weight should be. It's probably the biggest issue I see you know, when people ask me to consult, and you can ask, you know, what you're fighting at, and they're maybe fighting at kind of welterweight, or they're maybe fighting at 66.6 kilos, but they're walking around at 85. And you're like, it's a big cut to be made. And then you realize that's how they've always done it. You know, whereas we try and have a 10% margin. So if you're fighting at 66.6, we want you around about 73, walking around outside camp, because we want that cut to come off really super easy. Doesn't always happen either. Even was, we have the occasional athlete that has a blip, but you kind of get them back on track and remind them that. And then the other thing as well is, I think people don't appreciate in this day and age with the pandemic and everything else, is opportunities are everywhere now in boxing. So if you are having to make a rapid weight cut to get a sudden quick shot at a title, you're compromising yourself. Whereas if you're in close in weight and something comes up, the opportunities are there for you to grab it. And I think boxers need to switch on to this as well, that it's making weight isn't a one-time thing. It should be an all-time thing. You should be close to your weight so you can make the weight easier. You can have proper, because the other thing as well is one of the things that frustrates me a lot as well, I think, where we get probably unneeded risk and back to head injury and everything else and weight, is a lot of times people will go sparring out with their weight class, you know, and they're putting unnecessary risk on themselves, or they're sparring kids that are much heavier. I mean, it happens, you go to spar sessions and you're many of these two kids matched up and you're thinking, shit, no way that kid's like 70 kilos. And you say to the coach, what weight's that kid? And they go 69. You're like, fuck is he? Fuck. That kid's like 76. And yet they still spar them. Do you know? And it's like, well, you know, why would you take that risk? That happens probably more in the amateur world than the pro. A good pro is pretty switched on. Like Hannah won't spar with people that she thinks is reckless or dangerous. Dean and that's exactly the same. If you get good coaching staff, that doesn't happen. But not everybody has a luxury of good coaching staff, you know, and their kids are getting battered on a week-to-week basis. And these things kind of need to change. Education, hopefully, younger coaches coming through, perhaps it may change. But I'm still not seeing it as, I think there's a lot of people want to glory hunt and want to get into coaching and things for the glory, and don't realize the nitty gritty depressing side of coaching, which is the long hours and the kind of sitting in corners and kind of sitting, you know, I think everyone thinks they're going to jump in and be a coach, they're going to sit with a world champion, they're going to go, it's going to be lights, camera, action, and they don't realize you're sitting in a changing room for 5 hours. You don't see any of the fights. You get sprayed with blood and sweat in the corner. You have to wash gum shields. It's not the most attractive job on the planet, but getting the athlete to that point in time is the exciting part, you know. And I think a lot of coaches don't want to do that part. They want to do the shiny publicity side of it. And I think that's still a big problem in all sports.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm really hoping that a podcast like this can help purvey those messages out to the people that need to hear it, and slowly make the ball roll forward and make the mentalities change. Hannah, tell us about your next camp, your next fight. What are you excited about? What are you looking to implement maybe differently or more than what you've done in the past? And we'll finish on that. Go ahead.
Yeah. So hopefully, fingers crossed, and COVID depending, it would appear, I'm hoping that to be defending my world titles at home in Scotland, end of March, April time is what we're looking at. I'm absolutely buzzing about it. Like, I woke up the next day after my fight and I was already thinking about hearing the words "and still." That's like the next thing that's in my mind. That's all I can think about. And also, it's funny because after the fight, I during the fight and then after it, when I was looking back at all the stuff that was happening, I could feel like all this new stuff that I'd added with Andrew and in this last camp, it's all about to just all click in together. I'm on the edge and it's all going to drop over. And I'm excited for the next fight to really have an exciting performance. I want to put on a performance in the next one. I boxed to instruction for this one, and I boxed on the back foot for the first time for the whole fight. It's something I've never really done before. So I followed instructions, I did what I wanted to, and in the next fight I want to be able to go into those next phases and the next phase after that and put on a really exciting performance for my home fans. So yeah, that's my focus just now, and just then I want to work towards unifying the division, but Andrew knows this, so we're working hard.
Yeah, and Hannah's in the labs. We've got Hannah up at Aberdeen Uni next week, so we'll be doing some really cool stuff. We'll be doing like motion capture, looking at kind of hand speed and biomechanic positions, and then a whole heap of things. Hannah probably doesn't want to know about
No, I don't want to know.
We're looking at so we're going to be looking at like rates of force development. So we're looking at kind of that type of work. We're going to be looking at some one-gate trials, looking at aerobic, anaerobic thresholds, doing some baseline markers, because we're not in camp, so we're in pre-camp. So we get kind of nice little opportunity to look at other particular things that we can maybe tackle a bit sooner. As the things can work that way, we can hit the camp running really fast and be super technical in it. So it's exciting. It's good. I'm very beneficial to have John Babbage as my supervisor at Aberdeen Uni, because John's like a wizard. He's probably as batshit crazy as I am. So it's a good combination, and it's very exciting. Aberdeen are really proactive with this. We've got the full ethic approval for the research project with pro boxers. It's the quickest it's ever happened for me. And it's very exciting. We hopefully, we'll have Han in the labs during her camp. We'll have a couple other pro boxers in during their camps. And we should hopefully start to build that data to let us see just exactly what's going on with boxing and how we can inform better strategies. And it's very, very super exciting. So.
Well, these are some great times for boxing. Hannah, congrats again on your results, and very much looking forward to seeing what happens in the spring, guys. It was a great time having you both on. Andrew, thanks for coming back. Hannah, thanks for accepting the invitation. It was really great to talk with someone like you who's absolutely passionate about her sport. I can tell it, and I'm sure everybody who was listening and watching could feel it through the screen as well. Hannah, where can we find you on social media for people who want to follow your adventures?
So I made it really easy for everyone, because I'm not the greatest with technology myself. So everything is under at @team_Rankin. So that's for my Instagram and my Twitter. And if you want to follow me on my professional page, it's Hannah Rankin Boxer professional page on Facebook.
Fantastic. All those links will be in the description. Andrew, your links are in the description as well. Instagram and Twitter. Guys, thanks again. And I'll talk to you soon.
That's great. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you would like to support the podcast, please take a few moments to leave a written review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. If you want to watch this episode again, you can find the full video recording on my YouTube channel. You'll also find hundreds of hours of free content, all my podcasts, my thoughts of the day, structured presentations, and more. So don't wait, go subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode. Take care.